The Chernobyl Nuclear Power Facility still maintains an unsettling fascination for many people more than 30 years after the accident that made its name worldwide. We know that it resulted from a series of blunders and failures that had been piled up over time, compounded by human error and government opacity. Hey guys, welcome to our YouTube channel. Before we go on with this video, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Kindly click on the notification bell to get updates on our exciting content. Several factors contributed to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster in Ukraine in April 1986, such as a flawed Soviet reactor design and serious mistakes made by the station's managers. It was a direct result of the Cold War's isolation and the absence of a safe cultural environment. The catastrophe damaged the Chernobyl 4 reactor, which killed 30 operators and firefighters within 3 months and resulted in several more deaths. An individual was killed on the spot, while another died in the hospital shortly after due to their injuries. Another person is said to have died of coronary thrombosis at the time. Acute radiation sickness, ARS, was first identified in 237 people who worked on the cleanup site. It was later established to be 134 cases. Within a few weeks of the event, 28 people died due to ARS. Between 1987 and 2004, 19 more workers died. However, their deaths could not all be related to radioactive exposure. A fraction of thyroid malignancies detected since the accident in patients who were youngsters at the time are believed to be related to ingestion of radioactive iodine fallout. No one offshore was exposed to acute radiation effects. But what happened in reality, and why did it induce such a stir around the world? But before we meticulously dig into all of that, let's go back to the beginning and talk about nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is produced by fissioning specific types of big isotopes referred to as fissile isotopes. Atomic fission is the term used to describe the process by which a radioactive isotope breaks apart to become more stable. Isotopes are divagations of an element with varying quantities of neutrons, and some are more stable than others in terms of atomic stability. A fissile isotope disintegrates when a neuron strikes it. It may also disintegrate on its own every now and then. When this occurs, kinetic energy is released and transformed into heat, and it is this energy that is ultimately responsible for the operation of an electrical grid. As a result, why would we employ nuclear energy rather than simply fossil fuels? For starters, the energy released by a single fission process is approximately 1,000,000 times larger than the energy generated by the combustion of a single fossil fuel molecule. Now, it's time to return to Chernobyl. There were diverse elements that contributed to the Chernobyl disaster. To further understand them, it's necessary to first examine how the reactor functioned and how it was managed. The Chernobyl RBMK-1000 reactor is a model that has only ever been deployed in the former Soviet Union. It has never been utilized in any other country. For the most part, nuclear power is deemed safe. As long as safety standards are followed, appropriate materials are employed, and the reactor is intended to maintain a constant power level throughout time. This design feature is present in all current nuclear reactors. However, it was absent from the reactors at Chernobyl. Like all modern reactors, Chernobyl used uranium dioxide fuel that was enriched with uranium-235, an isotope of uranium that is extremely prone to fissioning. When uranium-235 is struck by a neutron, it breaks into 2 other atoms, plus 2 or 3 additional neutrons, resulting in a radioactive decay product. In other cases, uranium-235's fission can produce xenon-135, which significantly affects the accident. In other cases, uranium-235's fission can produce xenon-135, which significantly affects the accident. We'll get to that in an instant. Those 2 to 3 neutrons that are released are significant because some of them go on to hit other uranium-235 atoms, thereby extending the chain reaction and generating additional energy in the nuclear reactor. Large graphite blocks were employed in the RBMK-1000 reactor to control the speed of the neutrons, slowing them down by lowering the energy of the neutrons. Although it may seem contradictory, fast-moving neutrons are less likely to collide with and break apart uranium-235 since they pass through the nucleus at a faster rate. Slowing them down improved the likelihood that each neutron would strike uranium-235 and cause it to fission. So, keeping the reaction continuing and generating the energy required to heat the water in the reactor, thereby extending its life. And that water is really necessary. The entire purpose of uranium-235 fission is to generate enough energy to cause the water in the reactor to boil and turn into steam. The steam is responsible for spinning the turbines that drive the energy generations that supply electricity to the electrical grid. Okay, so now we have a decent understanding of how to keep a reactor operating and creating energy, but what happens if we want to slow down or even shut it down? The most common method of slowing down a reactor is to have fewer neutrons impact and split apart uranium-235 that is already in use. And the best way to accomplish this is through the use of neutron absorbers. Because of this, water was utilized in the reactor in addition to its primary function of producing steam. Water was also utilized in the reactor as a neutron absorber. Every element, including the hydrogen and oxygen in water, is capable of absorbing neutrons to a certain extent. While individual hydrogen and oxygen atoms aren't particularly effective neutron absorbers, there is so much water in the reactor that the waterworks are a good neutron absorber when taken as a whole. Suppose the water disappeared. The neutron balance would be thrown out of whack, as it has been. Another absorber is xenon-135, which is the fission product of uranium-235 that I mentioned before. In fact, xenon-135 is one of the most effective absorbers known to science, ranking among the greatest of all known isotopes. Even a minuscule amount of radiation can entirely halt a nuclear chain reaction. Last but not least, boron carbide control rods are used. Boron carbide absorbs neutrons exceedingly strongly, which causes the nuclear chain reaction to be slowed significantly. There were almost 200 of these in the RBM K1000 reactor, and they were moved in and out in order to lower and raise the rate of fission. As a result, all of these factors work together to keep fission going while also maintaining control over it. Today, we explain the events as they happened, from the Soviet Union's attempted cover-up to the genuine implications of the radioactive fallout. Let's dig in. Due to World War II, the Soviet Union made significant investments in nuclear power, and the V.I. Lenin Nuclear Power Station, which is located 10 miles north of Chernobyl, became active in 1977. There were 4 RBMK nuclear reactors on the site, each with a capacity of 1,000 megawatts and capable of generating electric power. During a period of routine maintenance on Reactor 4 on the night of April 25, 1986, a sequence of tests was carried out by plant employees who were sleep-deprived at the time. They intended to investigate if the reactor could still be cooled if the power went out at the plant, but they did so in violation of safety rules, resulting in many voltage surges occurring inside the reactor. It triggered a chain reaction of explosions with enough force to blow off the steel and concrete lid of the building. As a result of the reactor core being exposed, radioactive material was discharged into the environment. Official accounts stated that 2 plant workers perished in the original explosion, although some estimates placed the death toll at closer to 50. Dozens of firefighters who were dispatched to quench the blazes were also hospitalized with radiation illness as a result of the incident. Because the Cold War was still in effect, the Soviet Union did everything it could to prevent the calamity from garnering public attention. It took 36 hours before orders were given for the evacuation of the adjoining town of Pripyat, which was created for plant workers in 1970 and is now a ghost town. By the time airborne radiation was detected at Swedish monitoring stations, the Soviets were unable to maintain the secrecy around the event any longer. Following a brief declaration on April 28, a widespread public outcry about the hazards presented by radioactive leaks erupted in numerous nations across Western Europe. To put out the blaze that was shimmering in the exposed core, sand, boron, clay, and lead was thrown into the blaze to douse the flames. The Soviets next attempted to clean the wreckage with remote-controlled robots, but as the machine began to fail due to the toxic atmosphere, squads of men were called in to clear the area, which contained 100 tons of radioactive material. Later in the year, the first steel sarcophagus for the plant's 4th reactor, which was to be erected later in the year, was completed. Despite the fact that it was physically unsafe, it remained in situ until a new container was constructed in 2016. However, even with this safeguarding in place, it is predicted that the area surrounding the reactor itself will not be habitable for another 20,000 years. The Soviet Union finally erected a 19-mile-wide exclusion zone around the reactor, which resulted in the eviction of approximately 335,000 residents. Nonetheless, according to United Nations investigations, more than 6,000 children and adolescents were diagnosed with thyroid cancer as an immediate result of the accident. It's possible that hundreds of thousands of people were ultimately affected. In addition, it's believed that the accident resulted in damages of over $235 billion. It contaminated nearly 1/4 of the agricultural area in modern Belarus and contributed to the Soviet Union's demise earlier than expected. Beyond a few scientists and tourists who are attracted by Chernobyl's history, the area around the nuclear plant is now eerily quiet and remains closed to anyone who doesn't have a permit to be there. Even now, the full scope of the disaster is not fully understood, and it continues to be a subject of continuous investigation. If you enjoyed this video, then go on and like it. Please kindly subscribe to our channel and click on the bell button for more of our updates.